7 days. That's the number every Ontario landlord and tenant needs to know. Because starting September 21st, 2026, Ontario is changing some of the rules governing residential tenancy. And depending on which side of the lease you are standing on, you might love these changes or hate them. But here's the bigger question. Could these new rules actually change the GTA rental market? Could they affect how landlords screen tenants? Could they influence whether investors keep their rental properties? Could they affect rental supply? And ultimately, could tenants end up paying the price for trying to make the rental system fairer? Today, we are going to break this down without the political spin. I will explain what's actually changing. I will show you how these rules could affect a real landlord and a real tenant. And at the end, I'm going to tell you what I think Ontario still needs to fix. Because here's my view. We don't need a rental system where landlords win and tenants lose. We need a system where good landlords can operate, good tenants are protected, and bad behaviors on either side is dealt with quickly. Let's get into it. Imagine this. You are a landlord in the GTA. You own a condo that rents for $2,800 a month. Your mortgage is due. Your property taxes are due. Your condo fees are due. Your insurance is due. And then the rent doesn't arrive. Day 1 passes, day 2, day 3. You are calling the tenant. They are saying, "Don't worry, I will have it next week." Now imagine you are the tenant. You haven't lost your job. You haven't disappeared. You simply had a financial emergency. Maybe your payroll was delayed. Maybe your hours were cut. Maybe an unexpected expense hit your family. You are saying, "Give me a little time. I will catch up." Now we have two people looking at exactly the same situation. The landlord says, "I have bills to pay." The tenant says, "I need time." And this is the fundamental problem with rental legislation. Both sides can have a legitimate story. So the question isn't who's right. The question is, can the system resolve the problem quickly, fairly, and predictably? That's what these reforms are trying to address. First, let's clear up the date. You probably heard people saying Ontario's new rent rule starts September 1st. Not exactly. The major province-wide Residential Tenancy Act changes we are discussing today take effect September 21st, 2026. There is, however, a separate Mississauga municipal renovation licensing by law taking effect September 1st. So, if you own a rental property in Mississauga, there are actually two dates worth remembering: September 1st and September 21st. We will get to Mississauga later. But first, let's talk about the number everyone is going to be talking about. 7 days. Rule number 1, the 7-day rent notice. Under the new rules, the notice period for non-payment of rent for the affected tenancy is being reduced. For a typical monthly or fixed-term tenancy, the period changes from 14 days to 7 days. Now, before somebody goes online and says, landlords can now evict tenants in 7 days, stop. That's not what this means. And this distinction is extremely important. The 7-day period relates to the termination notice for non-payment of rent. It does not mean a landlord can physically remove a tenant from the property 7 days later. The legal eviction process still matters. The landlord and the tenant board still matters. And due process still matters. So don't turn this into 7 days and you are out. That's not an accurate description. But it does mean the initial timeline becomes significantly shorter. And for a landlord carrying thousands of dollars in monthly expenses, 7 days matters. Now, question is, why change the rules? Here's where the policy arguments get interesting. The government has been trying to address delays in Ontario's rental dispute system. Because when a legitimate landlord can't collect rent or regain possession when legally entitled to do so, the financial consequences can be significant. But there's another side. If you are a tenant living paycheck to paycheck, 7 days can also be significant. So I don't think the right question is, are 7 days good or bad? The better question is, does the system have enough safeguards to distinguish a bad faith tenant from a tenant facing a temporary financial crisis? That's the real test. Rule number 2, repeatedly late rent. Now, this is one of the changes I think deserves much more attention. Ontario is introducing a regulatory definition around persistent failure to pay rent on time. Under the new regulation, persistent failure can include failing to pay rent within 7 days of the due date on at least 3 occasions within 6 months, subject to the regulation's conditions. Think about that. We are no longer talking about my rent was late once. We are talking about a pattern. Late, late, late. Again, again, again. And that distinction matters because a good rental system should be able to distinguish between an isolated problem and a reoccurring problem or pattern. That's better than treating every situation exactly the same. But here's where tenants need to pay attention. If you are a tenant, here's my advice. Don't ignore notices. If you know you are having trouble paying rent, communicate. Keep records. Understand your rights. And don't assume I will deal with it later. Because under the new framework, repeated late payment can become much more significant. And if you are a landlord, don't assume my tenant was late 3 times, so they are automatically out. The law doesn't work that simply. You still need to follow the correct process. This is why professional property management and proper documentation become increasingly important. Rule number 3, landlords who need the property for themselves. Now let's flip the situation. Imagine you own a rental property. Your daughter is coming home from university. Or your parents need somewhere to live, or your own housing situation changes, and you genuinely need the rental property for your own use. Ontario's rules around personal use termination are also changing. Under the new framework, where the landlord gives at least 120 days notice and the statutory conditions are met, the landlord will no longer have to provide the 1-month compensation or alternative accommodation that would otherwise apply under the personal use provision. Now, I can already hear the comments. So, landlords can just kick tenants out. No, that's not the point. The point is that if a landlord genuinely needs the property for a qualifying personal use purpose and provides the required notice, the compensation rules are changing. But bad faith evictions remain a serious issue. And that's important because the system needs to protect a legitimate landlord. without creating a loophole for someone who simply wants to remove a tenant and re-rent the property at a higher price. The renoviction problem. Now let's talk about one of the most controversial words in the rental market. Renoviction. Here's the scenario. A landlord tells a tenant, I need you to leave because I have to do major renovations. The tenant leaves, the property gets renovated, and then instead of the original tenant returning, the property comes back into the market at a substantially higher rent. That's a scenario policymakers are trying to prevent. But there's an important distinction. Not every renovation is a renoviction. Sometimes a property generally needs major work. Plumbing, electrical, structural work, building code upgrades, major mechanical systems. Sometimes the unit generally needs to be vacant for the work to happen safely. So again, we need balance. What changes for renovations? Ontario's updated framework strengthens certain obligations around communicating with tenants during major repairs and renovations. There are requirements around estimated completion dates and notifying tenants when circumstances change. And the tenants' right around returning to the unit are important. The right of first refusal framework is also strengthened. So, if a landlord legitimately needs vacant possession to carry out major work, the landlord needs to follow the rules. This isn't optional. And then there's Mississauga. If you are a landlord in Mississauga, pay very close attention to September 1st. Mississauga's new rental repairs and renovations licensing by law takes effect September 1st, 2026. It applies to situations involving major repairs or renovations where tenants need to leave. Under the bylaw, landlords will need to apply for a municipal license within 7 days of serving an N13 notice. There are also requirements involving permits, tenants' information, and financial supports. For example, the bylaw provides for a one-time moving contribution of $1,000 for units 70 square meters or less, and $1,500 for units larger than 70 square meters, along with additional provisions for tenants who intend to return. And there can be significant penalties for non-compliance. That's from City of Mississauga. So, if you are a Mississauga landlord planning major renovation, do not treat September 1st like just another date on the calendar. You need to understand both the provincial N13 process and the municipal requirements. Now let's ask the big question. Who actually wins? Let's start with landlords. Landlords may benefit from faster initial action when rent isn't paid, more clarity around persistent late payment, changes to personal use compensation requirements where the new conditions are met, and potentially more confidence that legitimate tenancy problems can be dealt with efficiently. That matters because when you are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into a real estate, a risk matters. But tenants aren't losing everything. There are also protections being strengthened, especially around renovations. Tenants have rights. Bad faith conduct can have consequences, and the system still requires landlord to follow the proper legal process. So I wouldn't describe this as Ontario is siding with landlords. I had described it as Ontario is trying to make the system more predictable while tightening certain tenant protections. Whether it succeeds, we will see. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the GTA rental market. Because legislation doesn't exist in isolation. It changes behavior. Imagine you are an investor. You are looking at a property for $700,000. You run the numbers, mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, potential vacancy, property management, and tenant-related risk. Then you ask yourself, is the return worth the risk? That's the investor's calculation. And if enough investors decide the answer is no, they don't buy. Some existing landlords may sell, and fewer rental properties can mean less rental supply. And when supply falls, what happens? You already know. Prices tend to face upward pressure. That's basic supply and demand. But there's another side. If the rules make legitimate landlords feel more confident, some investors may decide, okay, rental property is still worth owning. That could help retain a rental supply. And that is why I think these reforms need to be judged not simply by did we make things easier for tenants or did we make things easier for landlords? The better question is, did we create a rental market where both sides are willing to participate? Because tenants need landlords and landlords need tenants. It's a relationship, not a war. Myth versus reality. Let's clear up a few things. Myth number 1. Starting September 21st, landlords can evict tenants in 7 days. Reality? No. The 7-day change relates to the notice period for non-payment of rent. It does not mean the entire eviction process is completed in 7 days. Myth number 2. These are new rent control rules. Reality? Not exactly. These are primarily changes to tenancy enforcement and related rules. Ontario's annual rent increase guideline is a separate issue. For 2026, the guideline is 2.1% for units covered by the guideline, and there are important exemptions. So don't confuse the two. Myth number 3, landlords can use renovations to remove tenants permanently. Reality? No. There are rules around major renovations requiring vacant possession, and tenants have protections around returning to the unit. And in Mississauga, the municipal licensing system adds another layer beginning September 1st. So, why is Ontario doing this? I think there are 3 big reasons. Number 1, the rental system needs more predictability. Landlords need to know that legitimate disputes can actually be resolved. Tenants need to know that bad faith behavior can be challenged. Number 2, Ontario needs rental housing, and the government needs investors who continue providing it. At the same time, tenants need protection from practices that can remove affordable rental housing from the market. That's a difficult balancing act. Number 3, the old system wasn't designed for today's housing environment. Housing costs have changed. Rents have changed. Interest rates have changed. Construction costs have changed. Population growth has changed. The rental market today is fundamentally different from the market many of these rules were designed around. So, the legislation has to evolve. What still needs to change? And here's where I think Ontario needs to be much more ambitious. Because these reforms don't solve the rental housing crisis. Fix the landlord and tenant board backlog. I don't care whether you are a landlord or tenant. If you have to wait too long for justice, both sides lose. Second, create a genuinely fast track for simple cases. If rent isn't being paid and there's no substantive dispute, why should that case move at the same speed as a complicated legal dispute? The system needs different lanes for different problems. Third, build more purpose-built rental housing. This is the elephant in the room. We can debate landlord rules all day, but if we don't build enough rental housing, we are going to continue fighting over a limited number of units. Fourth, make it easier to build rental housing. Faster approvals, more predictable zoning, more mid-rise, more family-sized units, more housing around transit, and better incentives for purpose-built rental. Because regulation alone cannot create supply. Fifth, recognize that a small landlord isn't the same as a giant corporation. Someone renting out one basement apartment has a very different financial risk profile from a company owning thousands of units. The system should protect tenants, but it should also recognize the realities of small landlords. My take. So, are these new rules good? Some are. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. I think the move toward faster, more predictable enforcement is positive. I also think stronger protections around legitimate renovations and tenants' rights are important. But here's what I don't want to happen. I don't want Ontario to create a system where landlords become so nervous about regulatory and financial risk that they simply stop providing rental housing. Because that doesn't help tenants. And I don't want a system where tenants are afraid that one temporary financial problem can immediately put their housing at risk. Because that doesn't create a healthy rental market either. The real problem. Ontario doesn't have a landlord problem or a tenant problem. Ontario has a housing supply problem, combined with a housing affordability problem and a dispute resolution problem. And those problems can't be solved with one amendment to the Residential Tenancy Act. Here's what I want landlords and investors to take away from this. If you are buying a rental property, don't just ask, what's the rent? Ask, what's my mortgage? What's my vacancy assumption? What's my maintenance budget? What's my insurance? What's my property tax? What's my legal and compliance risk? And what happens if something goes wrong? Because the biggest mistake I see investors make is calculating their return when everything goes perfectly. Real investing isn't about what happens when everything goes right. It's about whether your investment survives when something goes wrong. So I'm going to leave you with this. If you were thinking about buying a rental property in the GTA today, would these new Ontario rules makes you more comfortable becoming a landlord or less comfortable? I generally want to know because that's where the debate gets interesting. If you're a landlord, tenant, investor, or simply someone trying to understand whether the GTA housing market is heading, drop your opinion in the comments. And if you found this episode useful, subscribe to Real Estate Wisdom with Vish. Because here we are not interested in simply telling you the market is going up or the market is going down. We are going to look at the policies, the numbers, and the real world consequences behind the headlines. I'm Vish. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you on the next episode of Real Estate Wisdom with Vish. Bye for now.
Disclaimer. The information provided in this podcast is for informational purpose only and should not be considered as financial or investment advice. Consult with your professional before making any real estate decisions.